they just put so much into their first album, I didn't think they could take it further. They did though. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I am Molly, and in this video I am going to be ranking all of the studio albums from the progressive rock band the Mars Volta. Now this is a video that, I'll be honest, I was a little hesitant to do just because the Mars Volta only has 6 studio albums released, and I typically like to do these ranking videos when an artist has like at least maybe 7 or 8 albums out, just to make things more interesting. But time and time again, I kept seeing the Mars Volta pop up in comments and recommendations, and I know the Mars Volta 2, all of their albums are very different, so they throw a lot of sounds on each one, so I figured it might still make for an interesting ranking video. But anyway, hopefully you all enjoy this video, and yeah, let's get on into the ranking. Alright, so just a quick run through of the ranking system here. A+ are the albums that are perfect. A are going to be the ones that are extremely close to perfect. B are right in the middle, so nothing amazing, but nothing bad at all. C are just the albums that fade into the background, they're kind of forgettable. And then D are the albums that I just personally don't like myself. So I'm going to be going in order of when these albums were released. So that means we're going to be starting with the Mars Volta's debut studio album, Deloused in the Comatorium, and this one came out in 2003. This album has tons of really cool sound effects, distortions. The vocals almost sound at times like they're underwater. There's like a very watery sound to this album. And there's also kind of a condensed sound too, like a very hollow sound to this album, yet there's tons of effects going on and ambient things too. There's also a oddly tropical vibe to this album. There's some jazzy elements, and then they fuse that kind of warm, jazzy sound with very dark, eerie, echoey, atmospheric stuff too, and it somehow works. It shouldn't, but it does work extremely well on this album. The opening track, Into Inertiatic Esp, is fantastic. Those two flow together so well. It's a great little energetic start to this album. It really pumps you up. I don't know, it's just a very vibrant song. There's like a colorfulness to it, and it's just got a great sound to it as well. Also the track Cicatriz Esp, if I'm saying that right, it is very confusing, but in a fantastically brilliant way. It's just so intricate and complex, and then you've got those jazzy moments, but then at times it almost sounds like you're in a cave, and there's kind of like an eerie, ominous tone that the song takes on. But it's just a phenomenal track on, in my opinion, what is an equally phenomenal album. Deloused in the Comatorium just fuses so much different stuff. There's so many different styles and sounds going on here, and yet it works. Like I said, it's confusingly brilliant. You don't know why it works, but it just does. It kept me riveted from start to end. I thought this album was great, so Deloused in the Comatorium, I'm going to be putting in A+. Up next is the Mars Volta's 2005 album, Francis the Mute. Now, to be honest, after listening to Deloused in the Comatorium, I didn't think that the Mars Volta could go any further. Like, they just put so much into their first album, I didn't think they could take it further. They did though. We have Francis the Mute, and this album is somehow even more massive of an undertaking sonically than Deloused in the Comatorium, but it still works. There's so much sonically going on here, but it's so cohesive at the same time. Overall, Francis the Mute I found to have a little bit less of that kind of condensed, watery vocal sound that Deloused in the Comatorium had. I think there's also a little bit less of those jazzy elements. They still do have that a lot on Francis the Mute though. But this album, it just fuses distortion, creepiness with upbeat melodies, jazz, everything. Like everything is on this album, and like I said, it just works great though. Cygnus, Vismund Cygnus, the opening track on this album, it starts out kind of slow, and then it just opens up into this loud, bombastic track. It brings so much energy to the start of this album, and then with the sound effects and the ambience at the end of this song, it kind of goes in the darker, more eerie direction that they take at a couple of points on this album. And then the beginning of this album is fantastic, but when Cassandra Gemini starts is, for me, when things really took off and just went to the next level entirely. Cassandra Gemini to the end of this album is essentially one really long track cut up into individual tracks, and somehow they work really well listening through cohesively from beginning to end as one track, but cut up they also work as separate tracks. Frankly, it's kind of hard to go through and review this album track by track because each song kind of flows into the next. It's like all one really long song, but just all I can say is all of the distortion, the sound effects, combined with the warm kind of Spanish, Latin, jazzy side to the Mars Volta, they just blend those two sonical elements extremely well. This album was just fantastic from start to end. I didn't think the Mars Volta was going to top Deloused in the Comatorium, but they did. So with that being said, Francis the Mute is going to go an A+ for me, and I'm going to put it right at the top. I liked it even more than their debut album. Up next is the Mars Volta's third album, Amputechture. This one came out in 2006. This one, I love all of the warmth, vibrancy, again with like the Spanish influence on this one. It's really strong. There is a lot going on with this album too, and somehow the first two Mars Volta's albums, they just did it in such a way where it didn't seem like too much. It was a lot, but it worked. This album, though, at points, it's too much. For me, it just sounded like there wasn't enough cohesion going on with all of the sounds they were throwing on this album. It's enjoyable, don't get me wrong. I really loved listening to this one. It just didn't quite flow as well as their first two albums. Amputechture is a track that's kind of an example of this. It takes some interesting turns. At points, I really like it. At other points, I wasn't really sure about it. At the end, with the saxophone and the drums, it kind of redeems itself, but there's just parts of it that didn't work for me. Asylos Magdalena is another example. This one just kind of sonically goes in a different direction at the beginning, and I don't know if I necessarily liked it, but then at the end we kind of get that distortion and it goes into the next track really well. And then Viscera Eyes is my favorite track by far on this album. It's actually one of my favorite Mars Volta's songs in general. This one's great. It's just upbeat, tons of energy. It's almost 10 minutes long, but it just has this great groove to it, and they change it up enough where it doesn't get old. You know, from beginning to end, it's a very enjoyable track. So overall, Amputechture, I did really enjoy this album, but there are just parts that seem like they don't quite fit with the album. There's just not as much cohesion with the sound as with their first two albums. So I think I'm going to put Amputechture in B. It's definitely still very enjoyable to listen to, but it just falls a little short at some points. Up next is their album The Bedlam in Goliath. This one came out in 2008. Bedlam is a very appropriate word to have in the title of this album. There is just so much energy that they throw on here. It's just like craziness to listen to. I also found this album kind of fuses like a more old-fashioned sound with a very futuristic sound, which is pretty cool. I enjoyed that. The track Aliena is a really good one. I like the jazzy sound of this one, and it also kind of has a futuristic quality to it as well. And then I love the electric guitar on this one too. Goliath has kind of a pop punk vibe to it going on, and I just love how absolutely insane this song gets toward the end. It also kind of had a little bit of like a White Stripes vibe going on with the vocals and everything. And then the ending track, Conjugal Burns, just again with the craziness. But yeah, this album is truly Bedlam in sonic form. For the most part, it works. It's kind of for me like Amputechture. Like at points I love it, and at other points it just fell a little short for me. It was just missing something at certain parts, but overall it was really enjoyable. And I think the Bedlam in Goliath is on par with Amputechture. I think I'm going to put it in B, and they're about on the same level for me. Up next is the Mars Volta's 2009 album Octahedron. This one for sure I found to be the most restrained. It's slower, it's very bare bones at points, and the guitar really shines through on this one. At moments too, there was almost like some twangy, borderline country sounding vibes too. And it still does have that kind of distorted, condensed sound that Mars Volta has throughout all of their albums. It's just less so on this one. The track Cotopaxi stood out because it kind of gave a little more energy to this album. And the closing track Luciforms is also pretty cool. I liked the really eerie, kind of ominous tone that this song has, and then just with the crazy intense ending with all of the instrumentals and the distortion going on. I thought it was a really cool closing track to this album. But overall, Octahedron, for me, it did just kind of fade into the background. It's a beautiful album. It's a little bit more melodic on the slower side for the Mars Volta, and it's not bad just compared to all of the energy and everything they bring to especially their first two albums. This one just didn't quite do it for me. It kind of faded into the background. So with that being said, I think Octahedron I'm going to put in C. Alright, and last up is the Mars Volta's most recent album, Noctourniquet. This one came out in 2012, and this one definitely takes, I think, the most departure from that kind of warm, jazzy vibe that they have on a lot of their albums, and they kind of go in a more postmodern rock direction, you could say. There's definitely a strong futuristic sound to this album. There's a lot of distortion and effects going on. And honestly, I feel like for all of the effects and everything that they throw on this album, I was surprised it didn't stand out in their discography as much as I feel like it should have with everything that they were throwing on this. I want to start off by talking about the opening track, The Whip Hand, because this one, as much as I love the sound of this song and everything they put on it, there is one sound effect at points in this song that I have a physical reaction to, and not in a good way. It makes my skin crawl. It's almost like the buzzing of electrical wires, and I just found it really unpleasant to listen to physically. I don't know if that's just me. The track Dyslexicon was really good though. That one is a good example of how they go in that more rock direction. And at times, again, it reminded me of the White Stripes a little bit. I kind of got that vibe from it. Empty Vessels Make the Loudest Sound is also a standout for me. Kind of a more melodic track for the Mars Volta. And it kind of goes in a more dreamy, atmospheric direction. It reminded me a little bit of M83, kind of that style of electronic music. But yeah, Noctourniquet, overall, I enjoyed this album. I think they did a lot of cool stuff on it. And I will be honest, I feel like it's an album that will grow on me with time. I think the more I listen to this album, the more I'm going to enjoy it. They definitely do some really cool stuff on this one that they didn't really touch on in their prior discography. So it's kind of cool that they're going in a new direction with this album. But right now, it is not my favorite Mars Volta album. It's still good though. There's parts on it I really enjoy. So I think Noctourniquet, I'm going to put in B. I'm going to put it at the bottom of B. So there you have it. That is my final Mars Volta album ranking. So in A+, we have Francis the Mute, and we also have Deloused in the Comatorium, which is a close second. Those two albums are just awesome. In A, we don't have anything, which is kind of interesting. In B, we have Amputechture, we have the Bedlam and Goliath, and we have Noctourniquet. And then in C, we have Octahedron, and then in D, we don't have anything. Alright, so there you have it. That is my final Mars Volta album ranking. Like I said, the Mars Volta have been popping up in comments for me to do a ranking of, so I figured I would do this little video, and I just think the Mars Volta is an amazing band that's very unique. They're very outside of any genre. I feel like you can't really box their music into anything, and that's honestly what I like about their sound, is that these albums are all so genre bending, and that's what I love about them. But I enjoyed all of these albums. Definitely let me know down in the comments what your favorite Mars Volta album is, and if you agree or disagree with my ranking. And yeah, as usual, thank you all so much for watching. Stay tuned, and I will see you in the next video.